Welcome to Rumpled Trenchcoat, a Columbo podcast for all your Columbo needs. I'm Richard Nocella, and I'm here with my sister.
Adrian Nocella.
And this time we're here to talk about Blueprint for Murder, 1972, the last episode of Season 1 of Columbo. Starring Patrick O'Neill as Elliot Markham, a murderous architect. Janice Page as Goldie Williamson, the fiery ex-wife. Pamela Austin as Jennifer Wilson, the current wife, and Forrest Tucker as a half bulldog, half human hybrid by the name of Bo Williamson.
And a little, like maybe like a third Foghorn Leghorn.
Oh, okay, fair enough. He can pull off a cowboy hat and somehow not look silly. So
I beg to differ, but we can talk. We can do that. So the plot of this episode's real simple in that an architect, a real traditional Columbo villain, narcissistic architect, murdered a Texas tycoon because ultimately the Texas tycoon didn't want to invest in his project. And instead of letting the whole project fall apart, he murdered him. And that's really the whole plot of this episode.
It's a very fast episode in the beginning, and then I think it realizes that it has nothing else to do, so the brakes get slammed on it almost immediately for the whole rest of the episode. It's very fast moving in the beginning.
I think it's because this was not a planned murder. This was not premeditated.
Right.
Really?
Right.
I mean,
you're
slightly premeditated, like very minimally premeditated. It wasn't a fight and then he accidentally killed him, or a fight of, it wasn't like a rage killing, or that's not the right term. What do they call that? Crime of passion. This wasn't a crime of passion, but this was barely planned out, this one.
This was more a crime of opportunity. This was more, he realized, the architect realized that the wife was unreachable and that he had an opportunity to kill this man, and he did. So I guess we should maybe explain why. Because this whole Williamson city was going to be this grand multi-city block in Los Angeles, entire village. And it's strange because he's certainly billed as a con man, the architect. Like, I get the feeling that if somebody said, how much is this going to cost? He would have said, well, how much have you got?
Yeah.
But he still would have had an entire city block. I don't think that he would have reneged on that. Did you get that impression that he was going to just not actually build it? Or
I didn't get that impression. I have a lot of questions about the architect. I didn't get that. I think he would have made good on it, and I don't think he would have used like faulty labor. I do think that he was very interested in investing in himself. And I think he was very interested in making a name for himself. And he saw an opportunity to do this with really Jennifer Williams, which is his young, beautiful current wife, and not Bo Williams.
Yeah. Essentially, I think he wanted to be the next Frank Lloyd Wright.
Also, I think he wanted to be Frank Lloyd Wright.
Yeah. What did I say?
Frank Lloyd Wright.
Frank Lloyd Wright? At least I didn't say Frank Lloyd Webber. First of all, you have the very mercurial Forrest Tucker playing the millionaire, and the architect went quite literally behind his back to get his new, younger second wife, Jennifer Williamson, who kind of had stars in her eyes. Basically, he did a summer home for them, and she was so happy with it that when he said, oh, if you like that, let me build a 50-acre multi-skyscraper estate for you using your husband's money. And she was like, great, that sounds like a great plan. Boy, he'll love that. And so when Forrest Tucker came back from his trip from Europe and found out what was going on behind his back, he was furious.
Right.
And confronted the architect. And basically, the architect told him, I'm going to kill you.
Yes.
And Forrest Tucker said, you'd like that, wouldn't you? And the architect basically said, yeah, I kind of would, and I'm going to. So this is not one of the subtler, more subtle words.
Scene set at that point. And I just want to take a minute to talk about Markham's project. Yeah. He is way ahead of his time.
Yes.
I will say, if you listen to like bits and pieces throughout the entire episode, I think just for dialogue's sake, they have like, I'm an architect and these are architect things I'm planning. But if you listen to it, he basically lays out what has been done in Long Island City, which was once a very, very dangerous neighborhood that was filled with abandoned factories. And it was completely revitalized with this whole mindset of you live where you work, where you play, where you have family.
Yes.
So like your home, modules, right? Yeah. So your home is your home away from home, but work, but home, but work. And it's all like fluid and beautiful. And it's really cool because Long Island City now has like these AstroTurf soccer fields within an apartment complex. Like it's it's really cool. So, I mean, I don't know. It sounded like actually a pretty good thing to invest in.
Well, it did. And of course, that was even him talking about the current project he's working on that didn't even have to do with Williamson City. This was going to be a long, sprawling, almost like a Central Park type of thing in New York, but also with skyscrapers. He had this whole miniature model set in his office that really outlined a tremendous, tremendous undertaking. And it's something that I think somebody less money conscious and more fame conscious probably would have happily spent $1 billion in 1972 on. He just basically picked the wrong mark. He saw
picked
a good
the wrong mark. Yeah, because what he did is he picked Jennifer, which is his current wife, as the mark. Really, is what he did. Yeah. His much younger wife. And it's funny. This is an episode that I've watched in two phases of my life. When I was younger and watching Columbo for the first time, I was like, oh, his current beautiful wife is so beautiful and reasonable, and you know, what a great person she is. And then I watched it again and I'm like, oh man, I want to be like Goldie. Maybe we should talk about Goldie, because I'm like, at this phase in my life, I would love to be Goldie. She's got it all together.
Well, yeah, let's absolutely talk about Goldie. But what happened is the plan is pretty clever.
Yes.
Because the architect Markham realizes that if Williamson is found dead, that the project stops. Yes. Because Jennifer will have a trust fund set up for her, because Williamson knew that she was young and kind of naive. She'll be set for the rest of her life, but instead of getting like $1 billion, she'll get tens of millions, for the interest on it for the rest of her life. And we didn't really talk about actual money. It's very interesting how many times, because I know you like to look up the 1972 money.
I was waiting with my pen ready. I was watching this episode ready to write down the money so I could look up the conversion, but it was never said. It was never spoken.
It was never spoken, and they actually went out of their way. I guess they didn't research it, because they're never shy about talking money in Columbo episode. And I think he did mention 30-something thousand for the module of the building he was working on. That was the only time that money was mentioned.
So that would be about $250,000 to buy a module in the building, today's money.
Right. But everything else in this whole episode, and we'll get into digging up construction sites and everything else, it always amounted to, do you have any idea how much that would cost? And you know how expensive that's going to be? But they never actually mentioned.
Right. And my answer to that is no, I don't, because you've never told me. So
that's
I don't.
You literally
I don't know. It could be $55. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, so that's the whole plan. So the characters are, we have Bo Williamson, who is the tycoon, right? And then this is a crime of opportunity, because he really sort of travels a lot for his business. I'm assuming he's like an oil tycoon, right?
Yeah, an oil magnate.
He's Texan. Like, what else would it be?
It's implied. Right. He couldn't be more Texan.
Right. He's Texan, and he's going over to Europe. It's not like he's going to the Middle East, though. I don't know what he's doing. But yeah, so he's out of the country a lot, and evidently doesn't tell his current wife, Jennifer, that he is leaving. He just sort of comes and goes as he pleases, and she seems fine with that arrangement.
And after he confronted Markham, the architect, and this is very interesting, and this is going to absolutely affect the sympathy meter later on, but he basically says, this project is done. Don't talk to me or my wife again. Find somebody else to fund your city.
Right.
End of story. He didn't say, I will destroy you.
Nope.
He didn't say, I'm going to the press and telling them how you're taking advantage of my wife. He basically just said, leave us alone, and that's it. And we're done.
And then he also leaked the details of his will for some reason. He also let him know in a conversation, in an angry confrontation, that all the details of his will, that Jennifer will have a trust set up, that this project won't go further, that she can't spend his money.
Well, to be fair, I think he said it after the architect said, I'm going to kill you. And he said, well, you can kill me if you want, but then you're not going to get the money for the project because my wife is getting a trust fund. And that's where he had the clever idea of, well, what if I kill you, but you're not found? You just disappear. And if you disappear, if people think you just went to another country and never came back, then everything can go as planned. You can't be declared dead, so she gets to use all of your money, your current wife. You're not declared dead, so your ex-wife doesn't even inherit the 25% she would have inherited in the will.
Right.
And obviously, he has Jennifer wrapped around his finger because she really thinks he's a wonderful architect, and he is, and he's making this fantastic project, which he is.
Which he is, yes. It was honestly, I don't think Bo, he's not a vanity sort of character, so he wasn't interested in a legacy, a name left behind, or anything like that. He's interested in
being very, very rich.
Bo, listen, this project can give you immortality. As long as that city stands, your name will be remembered.
Name? I'm going to tell you something, Jackson boy. My wallet is a lot more important to me than my name.
Being very, very rich and continuing to be very rich, and also obviously didn't appreciate him using Jennifer to get this project done. I think that was it.
Because that was part of what he was angry about. He said, you could have waited until I got back to get my approval. I mean, he almost could have talked this guy into it. I feel like it was possible that he could have, if he played his cards a little differently, but he got a little greedy, saw her as an easy target, went for Bo's wallet through Jennifer's purse, and kind of blew it. And so the opportunity was, he found out that because Jennifer was at some kind of health spa.
They call it a health farm, which is amazing.
Yeah.
But they call it a health farm where she is drinking wheatgrass and is unreachable by any means of communication. They made a point in the episode to have the secretary try and reach her. No one could reach her to communicate with her, which sort of planted the idea in Markham's head of this, like you said, a crime of opportunity.
Right. He figured, well, if she's basically unreachable, I can go into her house, take Bo's passport, pack a suitcase, take the suitcase out, and basically really make it look like Bo has left the country.
Right.
Which, as far as he knows, Jennifer would have no way of knowing.
Right.
Now we could talk about Goldie, because what neither of them knew was that even though Goldie is Bo's ex-wife, they're still good friends.
They're like best friends, it seems like. That's still his confidant. And
Well, she basically said, he has the younger wife so that he can feel young and, have a trophy wife to walk around. But when it comes to anything serious, he still talks to Goldie.
Right.
She is very much the female version of him. So you could picture that they probably got together when they were younger, maybe even before he was wealthy.
Right.
And I think she said they were married 21, 22 years. It was over 20 years.
It was over 20 years, yeah.
What nobody knows except Goldie is that every time he leaves the country, although he doesn't bother to tell Jennifer, he always calls and tells Goldie.
That's right.
And so that leads us into Columbo's entrance. But, before we do, I do think we need to talk about Bo Williamson's car.
Of course. Look, there's a lot to talk about there. We have to talk about the car. We have to talk about the actual murder. And we certainly have to talk about his lady jacket, where he looks like a Bond villain, like a lady Bond villain, like a sexy, maybe like a Bond girl. That is like the sexiest jacket I've seen on Forrest Tucker. That is a questionable choice.
Well, let's start with the car, because that's the very first thing the audience sees in this entire episode is the grille of his Cadillac.
Yeah,
which does not have the typical Cadillac symbol on it. No. It has a gold-plated trotting or galloping horse as the hood ornament.
I love it.
And the side of the car, well, I mean, it starts off with him basically cutting off a station wagon because he's so furious about this that he's on the way to the architect's office, and he cuts off a station wagon for no reason. I mean, he could have just waited for him to pass. It's just showing that this is a furious,
he's furious,
impulsive, just somebody who could easily commit road rage and then feel bad about it later, maybe. But he is just seething with rage, putting his own safety completely aside because, again, he just pulled right in front of another car. So he's pulling into Markham's office. And then when he does pull, I guess everyone who leaves that Cadillac has to leave the passenger side, no matter whether he's driving it or whether Patrick O'Neill's driving it. They all park and then slide all the way across the car to the other side.
Didn't notice that.
I don't know why they didn't do it when they drive other cars. They leave the driver's side, but for some reason, I don't know if it's a camera setup thing or what, but they all slide across that.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
Or maybe they wanted to really emphasize that he has revolvers for door handles.
Yeah, because he slams the car door and his door handle is a revolver, which is amazing.
It's just great.
It's just, I'm thinking of like Yosemite Sam.
Yes.
It's so fan. That's what I guess that's really what he's less Foghorn Leghorn, more Yosemite Sam.
I would say that's probably more accurate.
Yeah.
And the only reason that it was a galloping horse instead of a more traditional bullhorn, literally horns on the hood of the car, because that would have made him more of a cattle rancher type of guy.
Yeah.
And he obviously is a horse racing kind of guy. So he storms in. Obviously, he smashes the model of the Williamson City.
Yeah.
And then leaves, and then he drives to the construction site, drives directly there. No safety helmet, nothing, just drives right onto the site. And that's where they have their confrontation. But I know I joked about the hat. I don't know if it's all those years of F Troop where I was used to him wearing a cavalry hat. I thought he did okay with that hat, but you're right. It was like a leisure suit, but not quite. It's like a Texas leisure suit.
His hat was fine. What got me is when they're at the racetrack. I guess it's a private racetrack. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
His leisure suit at the confrontation. That's just you're right. That's like a 1970s like Western style leisure suit, I'd say.
Yep.
Because certainly Markham wears leisure suits throughout the entire episode. Sometimes short sleeve, sometimes long sleeve. But that's like.
Markham's tie is so wide that it basically blots out his shirt. You can almost, in some scenes, you can't even see his shirt because that tie is so wide. It's pretty
great. Yeah, it's pretty great. But yeah, I was talking about in the next scene where he, it's just very, I don't know, he's wearing like cat eye sunglasses. I don't know who put that man in that outfit, but.
I don't know, because it looked almost like a 1970s Italian outfit. With the cat eye womany glasses.
He had cat eye glasses and a cream leather jacket with a shearling collar that took up his entire shoulders. So it was like a shawl rather than like a collar. It was just funny to see. It was funny to see Forrest Tucker, who's just a giant of a man, dressed like that. That's all.
Yeah. A giant of a man, a real mountain,
right?
And it's just tough. And even in his comedies, because I love Forrest Tucker.
Oh, me too.
Like I said, F Troop, and he was on the original Ghostbusters TV show, and it's just. But even when he's being humorous, it's him shouting. He just always shouts every line.
I do love him.
And the only difference between him being angry shouting and being funny shouting is whether or not Larry Storch is next to him.
Yeah.
That is the scene of the murder. Mm-hmm. He's very happy. His race horse is doing well since he was gone the past 2 months. Right. And so he gets back into his car where Markham materialized. How did he get onto the ranch? How did he sneak into Williamson's car?
I don't know. I couldn't tell if that was like a private racetrack. I'm assuming it's a private racetrack. I don't think it's at a country club. So that's Williamson's private racetrack. So I don't know. He did something where he just, like you said, he was in the back seat of the car and surprised Williamson.
Right.
And they didn't show how he got there.
No.
And they didn't show, he was just there. So they didn't show him like hopping a fence or parking down the road, which I assume is probably what went on.
Yeah, I guess they figured that we could just figure it out because it didn't matter. The point is that he surprised him alone at this racetrack, which they do say was his.
Okay.
And Markham pulled a gun on Williamson from the back seat.
Yeah.
Made him get out of the car.
Oh,
and
I hate this one.
What's that?
I was going to say, continue. I hate this death. I hate this murder, actually.
Yeah.
I hate this one.
Yeah, it's pretty bad because he takes him into, it's not the stable, it's apparently either the work shed or something.
It's the shed. It is the equipment shed on the stables. Yeah.
And so the two men walk in, and the very next scene is Markham driving the Cadillac. So important to mention, this is one of, I believe, only 2 episodes where you don't see the actual murder happen.
Yeah, and it's not for any reason.
Right.
This is because of the other. What's the other one? Because
the other one is Last Salute to the Commodore, and it was on purpose because you were supposed to think
that's right.
that Robert Wagner walks in and you see a dead body, or rather he walks out of the room with the dead body. So we, the audience, is supposed to be fooled into thinking he's the killer, and in that episode he wasn't. Right. In this one, it's clear that Markham killed Williamson.
It's a directorial choice, and it's unsettling because it's sort of like when you imagine a monster versus when you actually see a monster. Yeah. So when you see a murder, you're like, okay, I'm witnessing what I'm witnessing. But this is sort of like, it's very realistic. I think that's what got me. It's very, very realistic. It's like he walked in, you didn't hear a gunshot, you didn't hear anything, and it's and then that's the next scene. So you know he killed him.
You know he killed him because this is a man who you don't just suddenly drive his car unless he's dead. I guess they felt they didn't need to show it. Like, why bother at this point having him walk in, then shoot him, and then bind him?
I think they do need to show it because that is a Columbo thing. In all episodes, they always show the murder. Yeah. And they always show, we don't know if he's begging. We don't know if there's a confrontation. Forrest Tucker's a tremendous man. You would think like there could have been a fight scene. That was a directorial choice. I think that was on purpose, and it's very realistic. And to me, that was very unsettling.
It was, and I think part of what makes it unsettling is this whole time Forrest Tucker's been blustering and like, you can't get me, and he literally slaps him in the face with the back of his hand.
He does. I forgot about that. He does. Yeah. He hits him. You're right.
Yeah, just like a little gentle slap, but it's like, I can, look, fella, you don't know who you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, he shows up with the gun at his place.
Yeah.
So he didn't know who he was dealing with.
Right. You're right.
And I think part of what makes it unsettling is that Forrest Tucker is scared. You see him
scared, and he's larger. He's larger than life. And then that life is extinguished, and we're not a part of that. Yeah, it's very, you feel that. I felt it.
Yeah, no, I had forgotten because I haven't seen this episode in years, and I had forgotten that you don't actually see the murder. For the longest time, I thought Last Salute to the Commodore was the only episode where you didn't, and I'm wrong, clearly, because this is one where you don't see it taking place. I almost even wonder, was this supposed, because so much of this episode is, well, is he dead? Is he gone? Is he coming back? And although we, the audience, know that's not happening, did they still want to try and fool us into thinking that maybe he was coming back?
I don't know. I did think that for a minute because there are a lot of tricks played on us as the audience in this episode.
Yes.
There are, we could call that filler if you want, but there's a lot of sort of tricks played on us throughout this episode. So that's a potential reason, but it wasn't as in your face as the Wagner episode by any means.
Yeah. So that was very disturbing. And then of course he then leaves him there, and he drives back in that car, and apparently he can't go 25 minutes without listening to classical music because basically.
Wait, but I have to tell you a story because this literally just happened to me. I was at the gym with my friend. He drove. We were taking a very long time. I was finished. He was going to still be there. So he's like, you know what? Just drive my car back and come pick me up. It's a 2-second drive. And in that 2 seconds, I adjusted the mirror. I moved the seat. I changed the music, and I put on the heat. So maybe there are people in this world that are like that. But you're right. I mean, I didn't commit a murder and then personalize the car to my needs. But
that's right.
I am one, even with mom's car. Like, I'll drive mom's car sometimes, and I completely readjust everything. So, and then I don't fix it.
Well, look, the seat, the mirror, I mean, that's just safety. But the changing of the radio station is very funny to me because that literally, I mean, I guess spoilers. I assume you'd seen the episode before you're listening to this. But that is the one thing that gives him away is that this man who is clearly, got cowboy blood, his car has nothing but cassettes of country music in it. The radio is tuned to a classical music channel. And basically that's it. That's the one and only thing that gives the killer away.
Yeah. It's a big thing, though. That is big.
It's a pretty big thing. And again, it's like, well, why would you change the channel in the murdered man's car that you're driving? And I guess it's just force of habit. I guess he just loves classical music so much.
I think it is habit. Yeah. But that was funny.
Maybe he needed to calm his nerves because later on we see he listens to classical music when he's,
upset,
jittery or upset. So there could be a lot of that going on, but it just is funny to me, if I'm driving home from murdering somebody and I'm a clearly obvious suspect, I'm not going to,
put on Ariana Grande, which is your favorite.
That's right, of course, or the Chipmunks, either one.
Oh.
So I guess we got slightly ahead of ourselves, but it's okay because this whole episode is really, that was basically the entire episode. Now everything else is just details.
Yeah, that's the episode. But we do need to talk about Goldie. Unfortunately, she's really the next.
Yes.
Well, she's the impetus for the next scene.
She is, because we had already mentioned that whenever Bo Williamson leaves town, he calls Goldie to let her know that he's leaving the country. We also find out that he has a pacemaker, and he had a doctor's appointment scheduled for, I believe, the next day or very soon.
Right.
And so all these things are reasons why Goldie is already convinced that he's dead. Not even just that, something happened to him. She's like, no, he's dead.
Right, because she calls the police department and saying, look, I think you need to look into this. I think my ex-husband is murdered, basically.
Right.
And the reasons why are kind of weak because we're talking about people in their 50s and 60s, I'm assuming. Right. But it's that he didn't call his ex-wife to let her know that he left the country. And then, like you said, the doctor's appointment, they find out that he's missing a doctor's appointment, which is out of character. He doesn't do.
Right.
And his current wife is like, yeah, this is no big deal. He leaves the country all the time and doesn't tell me, which is true.
It is true. Because I don't know if the architect would have killed him and made him look like he ran away if he knew that Bo always calls his ex-wife. He might have said, well, you know what? That's an opportunity, but it's an opportunity missed. I'll just move on to my next sucker. Yeah.
Yes. Agreed.
So, of course, because Columbo got the call, he shows up at the dedication in the middle of the construction site where they're having like a little elegant party talking about what the building is going to look like. Fun little fact that building that they're showing is the Mannix building, which Levinson and Link also wrote Mannix.
That's awesome.
That's when he's talking about, like you said, architecture, buzzword modules. And you're like, oh, wait. That is actually what winds up happening 50 years from now.
It's a great idea. Like all of Brooklyn's like that now too.
But that's where Columbo starts asking for Mrs. Williamson. And I guess we don't need to go through all that. Basically, that's where we find out, the other woman, Goldie, was also Mrs. Williamson. And she's the one who called because Jennifer Williamson is just like, yeah, hey, whatever. He leaves, he comes, he goes.
She's a funny character because Bo Williamson, in his confrontation with Markham, comments that she's too young and naive to spot a con man.
Right.
But then really almost her first line when meeting Columbo is, I know I'm paraphrasing, but she's like, I'm an idiot, but I would remember if I called you.
I literally wrote that down.
Did you?
Jennifer Wilson introduces herself as an idiot is my exact phrase. I think what she actually says is, I may not be the smartest girl in the world, but I would know if I made a phone call.
And I just have to say, and I know it's 40 years later, but I have never started a sentence with, I might not be the smartest girl in the world. I just never.
Because it's completely unprompted. He just said, did you call the police department? And she should have said, no, I didn't
know.
She didn't have to start it with, I may be a moron, but I know if I made a phone call or not.
And I don't find her character particularly dumb. I just find her exactly what they said, is that she's just young and pretty.
Young, pretty, and naive. And she latched onto this, billionaire. And she actually, in from her point of view, everything she does is perfectly reasonable.
Right. It kind of is. That's their agreement. He doesn't really check in with her. She doesn't really have to check in with him because he didn't realize that she was at a health farm for 8 weeks or however long she was gone for. Yeah. And then they just meet up and then they have a nice time together. I think she liked him.
Absolutely. No, there's no question about it. And she seemed genuinely upset when there looked like there was evidence that he was dead and that he didn't just leave the country. So, I mean, she is not a loathsome character.
She is not.
And neither is Goldie. Let's actually talk about Goldie.
I love Goldie. I'm just saying, again, watching this at like 12, I was like, I want to be Jennifer Williamson watching this at my current age. And I'm like, I think I am Goldie.
I think I am Goldie. So again, bigger than life, boisterous, like I said, the female version of Forrest Tucker, but not as hard-edged. She's more like loud, boy howdy, calling everyone lover, just...
Do you know what's so great about her? Yeah, she calls everybody a lover. But she's like, they make a comment about, she makes comments about her clothing throughout the entire episode. Yeah. So I think even for 1970s, she's supposed to be garish because she's got the wigs, she's got the jewels, she's got like the medallions. She has a caftan, which I feel like you're going to talk about how she belts it, right?
I was going to talk about that, and I also was going to talk about how she'll show up at a construction site, with a cape, basically.
That outfit at the construction site, it was a cape and gold lame boots, where she did just look like it's not Spider Girl. Who's like
but she
is
did
it Spider Girl?
Like the Scarlet Witch or something like that. She looked like a cartoon.
I can't with like her wigs and her headdresses. It's just, she's so great. And like, that's the thing when you watch a show like this where you're like, is this how people dressed back then? And I would just assume yes, but I think not, because they do make it a point throughout the entire episode that she's like Technicolor and everyone else is just sort of in beige.
Yeah, no. They certainly made it clear that she is what the kids today might refer to as extra.
Yes.
I think they probably referred to that about 5 years ago. So I
know.
Still not deep. But anyway, she definitely is over the top, bigger than life, boisterous. But she's worried.
She's worried, and she calls everybody a lover. I could talk about her forever. Who's the guy from Hollywood Squares?
Paul Lynde.
Yes, she's like Paul Lynde to me.
Okay, yes, but over the top.
That kind of personality. Yeah. Like, I feel like she could be on like the Match Game.
Absolutely, yeah. No, she definitely could have been a more animated Fanny Flagg on the Match Game.
and she's so like quick with a quip. Everything is like hada, you know what I mean? Like, whatever anyone says, and she's like dabba dabba, like anything. She's got a cutting bite remark for all of it.
Even at the end when she shows up at the construction site looking like a Batman villain.
I mean, she's just my favorite character. She's just so much personality. But she's not too much personality. You know?
She really toes the line well. Again, that was Janice Page was the actress there. Did a great job. And I guess because we teased it, I'll just say when Columbo first meets her, she's getting a massage, wrapped in a towel, which is of course how you would allow a homicide detective to come in and interview you as.
Lover, take my word for it, he has shuffled off this veil of tears.
And so she then puts a robe on, is about to tie up the robe, and it looked like the tie was somehow strapped to the side of it.
I know why. I know why she had trouble with it, because that's a caftan, that's not a robe. So it has an interior. It doesn't wrap around like a traditional robe on the outside. You have to go inside, because that's the whole point of a caftan, where it's form-fitting in the front, but it is sort of like a cape-like material in the back.
Oh, see, no, I didn't even know what was correct. I just knew that looked wrong. Okay.
So I thought of you in this scene where she's struggling to get the robe on, because just like I can't help myself and I always look up the money, you have an eye for the continuity issues. Yeah. How much of a strawberry is eaten, like that type of thing. So she's struggling. The actress is clearly struggling to get that robe tied in that scene, and then in the very next scene is completely tied perfectly beautifully.
Yes. Yeah, and
in a very different way.
And in a very different way. And it was funny, and it was obvious, and they obviously did not take a second take, because they just liked that. And it was fine. I'm sure they did not expect people talking about her ability to correctly tie a caftan, 50 years after the fact.
Oh my God, it's so great. But yeah, so that's how we meet Goldie, and basically her and Columbo just exchange, she's I don't think Columbo really believes he's dead. I think he's a little curious. Yeah. But at this point, she's just like, he's getting the idea of their relationship. And he's sort of like, well, I know what you're saying, but you are also his ex-wife.
Right.
And there's really no evidence that he's gone.
There's not.
Or dead, I should say.
Well, right. Because it is, at the moment, there's not. Because while they're having that conversation, he gets the phone call in her house saying that they found Beau's car. Right. And she's like, aha, I told you. And he said, at the airport parking lot.
Okay.
Which makes it look, of course, like he did drive to the airport and took off for whatever reason, not telling her this one time.
Right.
Now, Columbo didn't say it this episode, but he always is interested in when people do things by routine and then they change their routine for some reason.
That's true.
And so I think even then he might have thought something was off. But of course, the next scene is him in the car at the airport with 3 very bored detectives sitting around the car while he's conducting music, the classical music.
Do you know what's so funny too? Like, how long could that have possibly taken that those guys looked so bored? Because what it is the next scene is that Columbo's at the airport in the Cadillac, and he's playing country western music on the cassette that's in the Cadillac. And then he looks in the glove compartment, and it's a ton of country western music.
Right.
And then he realizes that the radio has been set to the classical station, which we knew, right? Because we, the audience, knew that. And that's it. So it shouldn't have taken longer than that sentence. How many times did Columbo listen to literally every single cassette tape to make sure that there were country western music?
It makes you wonder how they could be so bored. It's like, what?
Were they there for like 3 hours while he was piecing together that this was all country music? I didn't understand. They looked exhausted and bored.
They did. Like the one who was the detective but not the lieutenant looking at the 2 uniformed cops were clearly giving the expression of, can you believe this? How much longer are we going to be here? And it was literally less than 5 minutes.
Like they were sitting down, they were sweating. He's like wiping sweat off his brow. It's a whole thing. And I'm just like, well, how are we supposed to read this? Is that just Columbo is so detail oriented that maybe he did listen to every single cassette? But even so, how long is that really going to be?
I mean, it's just not. And he couldn't have, because he looked surprised when he opened the glove box and saw all those cassettes. So he literally just sat in the car, listened to a little bit of country music on the cassette, and then that was it. Then he realized that it was a classically music-tuned channel.
Right.
He starts to conduct to it, and they're like, oh, that's it. I mean, really. I mean, the whole thing could not have taken more than 5 minutes, but they look like they've been sitting there for hours.
But that was an important scene because that's really the first time Columbo's like, this doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely where I think he starts to suspect that the guy is, first of all, dead. And second of all, he's got his first big hint as to who it might be if he catches somebody later who likes classical music.
Yeah.
So just like in the episode with Jose Ferrer, he knows he was looking for a cigar smoker.
Right.
He just didn't know necessarily who that is, but he knew the moment he found one that was going to be the killer. So I think just like in that episode, like this one, he knows that something is wrong. And he's probably looking for somebody who likes classical music.
Yeah. It's a pretty big hint.
Yes. Yeah. This guy his car has revolver handles. He's not listening to classical music. Columbo really is starting to think now that, hey, maybe something is going on. So now, I mean, really at this point, nothing else of substance happens for a while. Once Columbo realizes this guy may be dead, Goldie tries to push things along by planting a bloody hat.
Well, I mean, what we find out, though, what really I think escalates it for Columbo, aside from the country music versus the classical music, obviously he knows something's amiss, but Jennifer Williamson sort of let slip that her husband Beau and Markham did meet on the day that Beau came back before he left again. Right. So from Jennifer's perspective, she's like, oh no, he took a meeting with Markham and then left again. And but Markham told me about it. Everything's cool. There's no problem. Everything's got the green light. And that's when Goldie sort of shoots a look at Columbo like, I didn't know this. I didn't know he met with Markham again. He's definitely dead. And then, like you said, she moves things along. She plants a bloody hat, which Jennifer Williams screams at.
Yes. She screams at it. And this is what I wanted to ask. And the only reason I bring that whole thing up, because honestly, it was basically worthless to the plot. Yeah. It was just a filler. But this is my question to you. Do you think that Markham and Jennifer were having an affair on top of everything else?
You know, they kind of, I can't tell. I don't know. I don't know if, I think Markham wouldn't have minded initiating an affair with her. Certainly he was very familiar. Look, I've had work done in my house and I've never played tennis in a mini skirt with my underpants showing with any of my contractors. So there is that.
And also, I've also never had somebody throw me a sweaty towel and then I use that same towel to wipe the sweat off my face. Yeah. And to me, that was a very intimate thing that they did. And I don't know if that was a hint that maybe they were, or that just to show us that they were really that close of friends that they would do that.
I mean, I think if you really want to think about it, that definitely Markham would be interested in romancing her and having Bo never be found, because then he can control her and the money, you know, so it's all sort of win-win for him.
Right. Okay.
There were hints of it. It wasn't overt. I don't think so, only because she did seem really genuinely upset to find that hat. Because that signified, I'm like oversimplifying, but they found a bloody hat that would signify that Bo was in fact hurt or dead, obviously, right? So she did scream at a hat.
There was a pretty significant amount of blood on that hat. I know it was supposed to look like, you know, a little bit of blood, but I mean that looked like he had his head bashed in. Like nobody can have that much blood from their head and be alive.
You're right.
The amount put on that.
And so what happened was Goldie had the same blood type as Bo, and so she planted the hat. And this is before DNA, so they really went on blood typing, which means that she cut her leg, which that's a lot of blood
that was a lot of blood that she bled onto that hat just to move things along and be positive. It's such a rare blood type that was just kind of odd that they both happened to have that.
That's
was
funny. Yeah, that was funny. That was a funny one because I even know that's a very rare blood type. But yeah, so then that moves along and really, again, just like a lot more filler. And then, I mean, I guess we should talk about the piles and all that stuff.
Yeah, well, just before we get there, Columbo, of course, finds out by going to his office. And Markham, I don't know why he has an office. He's never there. So Columbo went to Markham's office and he found all those records of
actually, I do love this scene because they have the secretary welcome Columbo in, and then they have her repeat the same line 1,000 times, you know, that whole line.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is. Yes, so she says it 1,000 times. But what I find, and that was supposed to be like funny, but what I actually found funny is that she has no peripheral vision and she's such like a chatterbox. She's literally talking to plants. She's not even talking to Columbo, so she doesn't notice that he goes in the other room and is snooping around. And she doesn't notice because she's just gushing over Markham. She just is very impressed by him. And she's literally just watering plants and talking to plants the entire time. I just found that hilarious.
It is very funny because, she has no peripheral vision, doesn't notice, you know, him wandering in.
It was just so funny to me because you hear her out of shot. Like you see Columbo rifling through everything, and then you hear her out of shot just going on and on and on. She doesn't take a breath, that lady.
No. And she also never bothered, because I don't know, again, this is another episode where we don't know how much time passes, but she clearly didn't clean up the mess that Bo Williamson made when he smashed the miniatures. Yeah. I mean, it's been at least a day.
Right.
You know, because you had the whole dedication, you had Columbo stopping by. It was certainly long enough to pick up little pieces of styrofoam that were substituting for buildings and just clean it up a bit.
Yeah.
Because of course Columbo heard from Jennifer, Bo loved the idea.
Right.
And then he walks in here and the secretary says, oh yeah, he hated it and destroyed the whole thing. So it completely counteracted that.
Yeah.
You know, so then he had to stop by where Markham really was, which is lecturing 10 people about the pyramids.
I know. And again, it's just a lot of filler. They had like a little banter back and forth, and Columbo is I have to say, he's very sort of classic Columbo in this episode. He really is needling the bad guy.
Yes.
Dropping little drops here and there. He makes a lot of pun jokes throughout this episode. And he's even like, enjoy your dinner, but not like that, because he doesn't. That's not how Columbo acts. But it is like that.
But enjoy your meal after I let you know that the killer loves classical music, and I know that you do too. So enjoy your meal.
Right.
And of course, continuity is how much of the blackboard is erased.
I knew you were going to talk about the continuity. It's my favorite. Yes.
It's great, because I don't like to just be about that. But when you specifically ask somebody, hey, could you erase this blackboard? And he erases 3/4 of it, and you just decide to leave the room anyway. The whole point of the pyramid, which these college kids absolutely would have had to have known if they existed in America for more than 10 minutes.
I did think that. I'm like, how is this news to college level students?
Right. That the architects of the pyramids were said to be buried with the pyramids.
Right.
And so that was just so they could have a conversation where the architect could make Columbo think, yes, I killed him and buried him in the construction site.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. And Columbo was like, well, why would you tell me this?
Right. Right. And then is that the next part? Is just like the rest of the episode, Columbo just like waiting in line in government offices, pretty much just trying to get the rights to dig up the construction site to see if Bo is there?
Yeah, this was another Columbo waits in line. Instead of the DMV, it's at this permit site.
Right.
He waits in a long line to find out that he needs to wait on another long line. Mm-hmm. He comes back to the first line, and the guy's on his lunch hour.
Right.
It's just like, wah.
It's funny, but we don't. Yeah, it's funny, but we don't have to get into it, I don't think.
No, I mean that's all it is.
It's like relatable.
Yeah. The only reason why I even mention it is because that's where he says like 5 different times, do you know how expensive this is?
Yes.
And it's like, no, because like you said, nobody's telling anybody how expensive this is.
Well, literally never. I still don't know. I can't imagine that this is cheap.
No, I would have to imagine that probably cost the city a fortune, because this was a request from a police department to dig it up. So I guess not to jump too far ahead of ourselves, because we're here. Basically, there's a cement pile which is laid in a foundation of a building. It's a huge concrete rectangular solid. First, a hole is dug, and then the next day they put in a sheath, I guess, and then concrete is poured, and then they pull the sheath away once it's hardened. And the architect is basically saying, hey, if I were going to kill somebody, I'd dump them in the hole the night before we pour cement. And Columbo's like, well, why would you tell me that? It's like, well, because I know you're not going to dig it up. Maybe I just want to brag about it. And it's so clear that he wants Columbo to dig it up.
Yes.
That Columbo digs it up.
He goes right on ahead and digs it up. But you know what's funny, too, is that they don't really search for Bo. Other than looking through his house, they don't really search for Bo, because that's why I was asking if the racetrack was his property. And you're right, it is his property. But it's like, how do you not search? But Bo was stashed in the equipment shed on the property of the racetrack, or whatever, the stables. Like, why wouldn't you look there?
Well, I was going to say that's something I didn't think of when I first watched it as a kid.
Yeah.
Because I was 4. So, but.
Right. What a dumb 4-year-old you were. You didn't plan out a search.
I had to at least reach kindergarten before I could point out plot holes and Columbo. But my first thought watching it this time was, how lazy were the police? How do you not look in one of his 2 locations in America?
They found his car. They looked through his house. And then they're like, where is he? But he's got another property.
He's got another property which he's spending a fortune on, clearly, because he has a jockey, he has a horse, he has a stable, and he has a stable shed. And nobody in the entire homicide department of Los Angeles thought to look in the shed.
Right. And you know what's also funny, too, is that he met with the jockey that day. So the jockey, aside from Markham, was the last person to see him alive.
That's true. That's right.
So that does place him at the
stable. The episode again.
No, and they would place him at the stables.
So lots of little things like that, because clearly his body would have been found.
Right.
So they would not have searched for it there.
Right, because when I was rewatching this, I knew the whole plot line was this architect murders the wealthy tycoon for those reasons, and then basically hides the body with the idea that the body will never be found, so he can have this, I guess, access to his money. He doesn't want him found. And I just kind of thought, was he like driving around with him in the trunk of his car? Like, I didn't remember where he stashed him.
Right, because if he did that,
we watched it.
Yeah, if he drove around with him in the body of his car, that would have made him Jack Cassidy in Murder by the Book.
Which, by the way.
Yes, well, we'll get to that.
Okay.
Because yes, there is a reason why that seems so familiar.
Yes.
So, long story short, Columbo goes through all the process, gets all the permits at great expense, taking all day and months, and just basically this huge pile has been broken down, jackhammered, welded open, dug out, and of course there's nothing there because the body is still at the cabin. And this is where I think they cheat a little bit, because I might as well just jump to the end and then we can back up. But basically, the whole thing is dug up, and the idea is that the architect, now that everything has been done, is now going to really put the body there so that they can fill it up with cement again, knowing that nobody would certainly ever dig it up a second time.
Yeah, you're not going to, I think they even say you're not going to search the same place twice.
That's right. As he's driving the body back to the place, he opens the trunk, pulls the body out of the car, and of course all the lights turn on, and Columbo and everybody on planet Earth is there with him literally holding a dead body in his arms, and that's it. That's the end of the episode.
Right.
But backing up slightly, and why I'm wondering, that seems a little bit like a cheat. Columbo, I know it's Peter Falk acting, but Columbo himself is acting really, really dejected and depressed that they didn't find the body, to the point that, yes, I can understand that some of that was to try and lull Elliot Markham into thinking, oh, your plan worked. But some of it really seemed like he half expected to really find that body there. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, because I wrote that down when I was rewatching the episode. I thought the same thing. I was like, is this just sort of a win-win situation for Columbo, where if they find the body, great. And if they don't, well, then he'll probably dump the body in there. It was a bit of a disconnect of how he was acting, because like you said, he looked like, I'm going to get in trouble with the city. Like, this is a huge deal. I could be fired. And then at the end, it was like a Nelson, like, ha ha, from The Simpsons. Yeah. Because he's just like, well, obviously you pushed me to do this. And I'm like, well, wasn't that obvious? Like, I don't know. It was a disconnect.
It was a little bit of a disconnect because, yes, he said, you kept finessing me into it. And he literally said, well, then why did you dig it up? And he said, well, I had to play along. That was not the face of a man who was just playing along, I don't think.
It was weird. It was like two different acts.
Yes.
It was obvious to me too. I thought the same thing. I think they could have started with, I think they could have relied on, look, I had a feeling it could have been there, but I wasn't sure. But then I knew for sure after we dug it up, and if Bo wasn't there, that we should go ahead and follow you.
Yeah, that we knew that you were going to go get Bo.
Yeah, you were going to get Bo.
I'm sorry, I was just going to say they could have just simply even followed him from the site while he went to the stable to get the body. They didn't have to necessarily wait. In fact, they took a huge chance by not following him, because he could have decided to toss him in a lake. Yeah. He didn't have to bring him back to that construction site. He could have just done that to make Columbo look dumb.
This is a good episode, though. I like this episode a lot. This episode could have been done in maybe 25 minutes. However, it wasn't a chore at all to watch. Like, even though it was a lot of filler, it was funny filler. I liked it. The characters were good.
Yes.
Like, I enjoyed this episode. They didn't show it a lot in reruns when I was growing up. This was not one that was in heavy rotation.
This was definitely... It was, one of those rare episodes. But yes, it's funny because it was filler, but fun filler. You watch it, the episode's done, and you're like, oh, that was a good episode.
Yeah, and it didn't feel long. It didn't feel dragged out. I liked it. This is a fun episode. And I just, as I've mentioned 1,000 times, I do love Goldie as a character. I love her outfits. And you're right, when she showed up at the construction site at the end to support Columbo.
Right.
And full on kisses him on the mouth as a greeting.
Yes. That was a little odd, and I get it, she's over the top and everything, but he didn't react in any way to the point where I was like, was that an ad lib? I mean, that was just such a strange.
I feel like it was an ad lib, and I'll tell you, it's not like the camaraderie that she felt wasn't reciprocated by Peter Falk or Columbo, I should say.
Right, yeah.
It wasn't. So it was just sort of like he didn't mind her, but it wasn't like, hey, Goldie, we're in this together. Let's get this guy. He's just like, yeah, I think you're right. But anyway, let me get back to this construction site.
Yes, exactly. So that was a little weird. That did stick out a little bit. But you just say, okay, she's just completely over the top. She almost is like if Bo Williams was Yosemite Sam, then she was probably Bugs Bunny. So it would make sense for her to just kiss somebody on the lips for no reason.
She's pretty fun though. But yeah, I mean, that's really the episode, right?
Yeah. The only other thing I wanted to mention was when Markham was driving the dead body from the stable to the construction site, he has a flat tire.
Right.
And there's a really great tense scene where a cop is pulling behind him and even compliments him on how well he pulled out of that skid and tells him to pop open the trunk so that he can help him change the flat. And you're like, well, there's a dead body in that trunk. He's not going to want to do that. He just gets out of it by saying that the spare is also flat. And then as soon as the cop pulls away, he immediately changes the tire. And so, again, that also was filler, but at least it was a tense filler.
It was good filler, but it was filler.
Yes. And it's interesting because that same exact scene was written in Murder by the Book when Jack Cassidy was driving around with his dead writing partner's body in the trunk of the car. He was supposed to get a flat and a cop was supposed to do that. That whole scene was already written.
Yes.
But they had enough filler in that episode that they didn't need that filler. So they used that filler in this episode.
It's good. I imagine, I'm obviously not a writer, but I imagine that that's what you do, that you have these little ideas and you sort of see, well, maybe I can weave them into this story here or there. And you have these like little sparks of an idea here or there and see if you can play mix and match. And certainly if you're doing crime writing or this type of genre, like you can.
Absolutely. And so he did. So I thought that was neat, but it's also neat that it was literally the same car with the same license plate. And that I didn't realize. That was pretty neat. That's the episode. So why don't we just go into, when did Columbo know?
How'd you know?
I suspected you 10 minutes after I met you.
I feel like we're going to agree on this.
I think we're going to probably agree on most of these here. Yeah. So let's just see. I would say, well, I think honestly, as soon as he went to the architect's office, saw the smashed city, and saw nothing but classical music as far as the eye can see.
It was just that music thing that bothered him. Carnegie Hall in Nashville. They don't mix.
And that's when he knew that it was him. I think he knew he was looking for somebody who liked classical music before then, obviously. Yeah. And he might have even have thought in retrospect the conversation at the dedication was a little bit odd, but I don't think he suspected anybody because I don't think he thought that Bo was dead yet then. So for me, I think he knew when he visited Markham's office. So he knew technically before he spent more time with him, but I think he knew at that point.
I would agree 100%. Nothing to add.
Okay, then we might as well move on. So the sympathy meter.
I have this dream, Francis. I'm working. There's a phone call, and he says, terribly sorry, but your wife's dead. And then I always wake up, and I want to cry, because you're still alive.
I'm going to rate this pretty low. I don't think he's very sympathetic for a lot of reasons. I don't think he was vicious as Dick Van Dyke, but I've got to put him at near Dick Van Dyke levels, almost as bad as Dick Van Dyke for a few reasons. One, this was a completely unnecessary murder.
Yeah.
This was a man who was already famous as an architect, who was already rich, just wanted to then be the next world famous architect, and killed a guy when he easily could have just said, oh, I'm sorry, this project didn't work out. Let's find the 1972 version of Donald Trump and see if he wants an entire city named after him. I'll just move on to my next billionaire.
Right.
So completely unnecessary. The guy, and this is why I mentioned it earlier in the episode, he wasn't threatened. No. The threat was, I won't pay for your project. It wasn't, I'm going to go to the press and tell you that you tell them that you take advantage of young naive women. It wasn't It wasn't, I'll see to it that you never build so much as a pup tent in this town again. It was just simply, I'm pulling my money out, get lost, don't talk to me and my wife again.
Mm-hmm.
So he didn't have to lose credibility. He didn't have to risk losing his job. He didn't have to risk losing his fame and stature.
Mm-hmm.
He missed out on maybe a multi-billion-dollar project, but he still could have gotten it.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was pretty terrible the way he just kind of let him in at gunpoint into that shed. And so I'm putting him at almost full Dick Van Dyke on this one.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, again, rewatching this episode and now really paying attention to what we think of the killer, right?
Yeah.
I think this is the weakest motive of all Columbo's that I can recall from the top of my head. So as we go through the series again, maybe something else would jump out of me, but certainly for season 1 and certainly from my own head of knowledge of Columbo murders, this is the worst motive for murder.
Yeah.
And exactly for why you said there was actually really no reason to kill him. And I want to touch on what you said earlier. I do think if he let him cool down and he talked to Jennifer Williamson, that they both could have probably talked Bill Williamson into going ahead with this project.
Yeah, I think they could.
So I think it was a completely unnecessary murder. Having said that, it didn't despise him as a killer.
Right.
There's like plenty of just the villains you love to hate. I didn't hate this guy. I was just kind of like, I'm just watching it. He didn't rub me the wrong way. I've worked with people like that. I've had professors like that where they're just kind of full of themselves, but they're kind of, if you didn't know, he just murdered somebody in cold blood, kind of harmless.
Yeah.
He wasn't awful. He wasn't a bore. He wasn't unbearable.
No.
There's been victims that I find more unlikable than this guy.
Yeah.
But I think his motive was so weak.
Yeah.
Absolutely no reason to kill him that I'm going to put him on the sliding scale very, very, very close to Dick Van Dyke. Dick Van Dyke at least had a motive.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it wasn't a great one, but it was a motive.
But it was a motive. And who doesn't hate their ex-wife, or wife, I should say. But it's like, this is.
Well, it is. And I guess that's where is the sympathy meter really for sympathy versus viciousness? Because, he wasn't a vicious guy, but I had absolutely no sympathy for his, for him. Look, the last episode we did, Short Fuse, the guy was going to lose his job, his career,
everything.
Get expatriated from the country, his family, just everything, his birthright.
Yes.
And now this guy is just, I'd have to put in some work to getting another billionaire to fund my project.
Yeah, this is a project fell through. That's all this is. It wasn't even like they broke ground on it. So he did arrange for this stuff to begin, the project to begin.
Right.
But a project fell through, which happens all the time.
Yeah.
So it was really just completely unnecessary. And you're right. Do I find him sympathetic? No, but I didn't hate him either.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're in agreement there. And so next, will it stand up in court? He was literally holding a bound dead body in his hands.
So I'm going to say yes.
I'm
going to jump the gun on that and say yes.
Yeah, I think we can both agree that that's going to be a little tough to defend. So I guess all that's left to say is thank you for listening. This was a fun episode. It definitely was a bit of a filler for most of it. And the one giveaway clue happened really early and there was nothing else to trip the guy up. But, I'll just say thanks for listening and we will see you.
Oh, one more thing.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Okay, so because I was so obsessed with Goldie in this episode and how she wore head to toe lame in this material, in this entire episode, I have some fun facts about gold lame.
Okay.
As a fabric. So I always associate this look with the 1970s, but it goes back like everything for centuries. What's funny to me about this is all the information I got on this is on like a Wikipedia page, which is where I find everything. But in a world where everyone has a lot to say about everything, there's like a paragraph written about gold lame. I don't know why. There's not a lot of information out there. It's basically just like, it's a fabric. What do you want?
Right.
So that's what it is. I thought there'd be something there. I thought it'd be named after somebody. Maybe there was like a Professor LeMay that invented it. No,
or Queen LeMay the Third.
Right. No, it's just exactly what you think it is, which is it's fabric that has little metal fibers thread throughout. and it makes a resurgence every decade, but it was really popularized for mainstream society in like the 30s.
Okay.
And when it first debuted for people to buy, right? Obviously it's very expensive, so it was really just for like evening gowns, and it has sort of that like sleek, shiny look because it is real metal. That's real metal, you know, sewn right into it. So it's silver, which is very popular, gold, or copper. Those were the metals that were used. And there's this great quote by this socialite in the 1930s who's like, you know, I love the way it looks, but when I sweat, I smell like a bird cage. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. Elvis popularized it. He wore a gold lame suit in the 1950s on the cover of one of his albums. And it was hugely, hugely popular because it was more affordable in the 1970s, because that's really when they started making all the synthetic fabrics, which is hence polyester, the leisure suit. You know, part of the reason why it wasn't as popular beforehand is because it was just so expensive, right? Because you can't really afford. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense if you're weaving actual gold and silver into an outfit. Yeah.
But that's it. I mean, really, I was like, oh, you know what I'm gonna do on this episode? I'm gonna look into the history of gold lame, and that's it. You're welcome, folks. That's what it is.
There you go.
So I'll just stop talking. I won't make it longer than it needs to be. So that way we can wrap up this episode. Maybe my one more thing was a little bit of a filler, even just like this episode.
Well, fair enough. And speaking of which, one more thing. So this episode is unique in that it is the one and only episode that Peter Falk directed. He had wanted to direct from early on, and although now you see that on every show, almost every actor of every show has an episode or two that they directed, but in 72 that was a very unusual thing. And in fact, Levinson and Link really didn't want him to. They just basically turned him down, and until he walked off the set. He actually walked off the set until they changed their mind, and so they gave him this script. But this script was a very difficult script because you had construction sites, you had pylons and concrete, you had to film all of that. You had so many different locations. He had to go to a government building, a house, different parts of a house, Goldie's place. You know, we joked that some episodes take place in practically one room. This one just had so many multiple location shots.
You're right, and it's like exteriors. You know, it's like it's not even just like on set or on a house. It's
right. It's
so the construction sites alone, I would imagine, would be very difficult.
It was very difficult, to the point that he got so frustrated that he never directed another episode again. And so two things that were great. One, in preparation for directing this, he consulted with Steven Spielberg and John Cassavetes, who had done earlier episodes as directors and he was friends with. And two, I guess if you play a genius, you probably don't want to go up against the actual writers that make you a genius.
Probably not.
Well, I guess then there's nothing much else to say except to, follow us on Twitter at Rumpled T, at twitter.com, and on Instagram at Rumpled Trenchcoat, all one word. And on Patreon at Richard Nocella is creating Rumpled Trenchcoat. And until next time, get out in that kitchen and rumple those trench and coats.
Why am I surprised every time?
I don't know, but I'm actually kind of proud about how awful that one was.
That one was, but it's so funny because I know it's coming. At this point, I know it's coming, and I never expect it to be that spectacularly terrible.
Well, I'll see you next time, folks. Bye.
Bye.